Cheers and fears. The U.S. Congress threatens to kill a much-celebrated nuclear deal with Iran, which was sealed by the world powers after an exhausting round of talks. In the meantime, local businesses in Vienna, which was hosting the negotiations, sighing with relief now the city centre can reopen for pedestrians and traffic. The International Monetary Fund lashes out at the EU over the Greek bailout, calling the European assessment unrealistic and unsustainable. Plus, large-scale military drills begin near army bases across 7 U.S. states, with a media ban on observing the exercises helping to fan some pretty wild conspiracy theories. Your worldwide news 24/7. This is RT International, live from Moscow. From all of us here, welcome to your headlines. Iran has agreed to curb its nuclear program in exchange for the lifting of sanctions. A much anticipated deal is now in place, but to make it stick, much still needs to be done. Starting with the UN Security Council, which will consider rolling back restrictions on Iran next week. Though for the negotiators, it was all cheers and a time of relief.
The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is a balanced deal that respects the interests of all sides.
A win-win solution.
This is an historic day.
The celebratory mood engulfed the streets of Tehran as well. Crowds praising their foreign minister for getting world powers to lift sanctions. However, that is not a done deal yet. The U.S. Congress needs to approve the removal of restrictions, and lawmakers have already warned their president that the agreement made in Vienna will be a tough sell. Here's RT's Marina Portnoy.
U.S. President Barack Obama says he welcomes a robust debate with Congress over the Iran nuclear deal. But based on the criticism already being voiced, America's leader is in for a fierce public political battle with many U.S. lawmakers. Under legislation approved earlier this year, Congress has 60 days to review the accord. During that time, lawmakers could hold a vote of disapproval or take other actions aimed at jeopardizing the landmark deal with Iran that the Obama administration spent years negotiating. Now, the spectacle of a majority of Congress rejecting such a delicate international agreement, experts say could be damaging and embarrassing, but that hasn't stopped many Congress members from accusing the U.S. president of conceding to Iran while compromising international security.
The agreement that came out today is the greatest disappointment.
The issue is not just Iran's nuclear program. The issue is Iran.
It is a hope that I have difficulty sharing.
I'm greatly saddened, sickened, and frustrated over this deal.
The historic deal to limit Tehran's nuclear program in exchange for lifting sanctions has turned into a talking point for the upcoming U.S. presidential elections, as many Republican candidates have taken to Twitter to slam the agreement as weak, flawed, one of America's worst diplomatic failures, and an existential threat to America's ally, Israel. Ultimately, President Obama can veto any congressional resolution of disapproval, and he's already said he's prepared to. Congress needs a 2/3 majority in each house to override a presidential veto. But at the end of the day, given that Iran's nuclear deal is being touted as a major achievement for President Obama, a part of his legacy, he will want the majority of Congress to support him. And gaining that support amid such a divisive political climate may prove to be more challenging than negotiating with a former adversary. Marina Portnoy, RT, New York.
The nuclear deal with Iran triggered condemnation from one of Washington's closest allies, that of Israel, though some cartoonists were quick to highlight the reaction. The Israeli Prime Minister calling the agreement a bad mistake of historic proportions, and his reaction prompted Twitter users to come up with pictures like this one, showing an apparently disappointed Netanyahu and a very happy Zarif. Let's give you some of the key points here from this Iran nuclear deal. Tehran agreeing to limit the enrichment of uranium for the next 15 years and will allow the monitoring of its nuclear sites for 25. In exchange, it gets the lifting of economic sanctions after international inspectors confirm it is complying with the deal. The arms embargo against Tehran will remain in place for 5 more years, and all the sanctions can be snapped back into place within 65 days if Iran violates the deal. But what is casting a shadow over the nuclear accord is that apparently not everything has been agreed upon by the sides. Part of the text is entitled "A Roadmap for Clarification of Past and Present Outstanding Issues." Under that roadmap, Iran still has to provide written explanations about any issues raised by August the 15th. The international nuclear watchdog then has to review them and table any questions. The whole process should be wrapped up by mid-autumn with a final IAEA assessment by December 15th. And Robert Kelly, a former senior official with the IAEA, he told us the process of monitoring, that raises many questions.
IAEA could go on fishing expeditions and act as an intelligence agency for other people. I don't think Iran is going to allow that. And also, I think you have to kind of wonder about that word suspicious. It's appeared in a number of press releases in the last year. What's a suspicious facility? Facilities are usually not suspicious. They don't suspect. So you're in a position of saying it's in the eye of the beholder. The IAEA will have no problem at all monitoring uranium materials, the production of uranium, the chemistry. That'll be easy. The problem will come when IAEA is asked to look into things like high explosives, detonators, missiles, things like that, where they have no expertise and they have no historical mandate. For the last 50 years, they haven't done those things, and so for them to suddenly become experts in those areas, I think, is impossible.
Well, whatever the threats to the deal actually being implemented, the diplomats and experts involved can all take a deep sigh of relief. Now, the U.S. delegation, well, it flew across the Atlantic 69 times in the past year and a half of talks. One team member traveled more than 500,000 kilometers. That's roughly 16 trips around the world. But here's apparently what kept them going. Well, kilos of nuts and also lots of strawberry Twizzlers, all during the talks in Vienna. And the journalists, worn out by waiting for the results, are happy to come home, and not least RT's Polly Boyka.
The Iranian nuclear deal has been delivered to the world after 18 days of marathon talks here in Vienna. Now, the setting for the seemingly never-ending story was here, the Coburg Palace Hotel. That's where the delegates were locked in negotiations from dusk until dawn. And over on the other side of the road was where the journalists were. They spent day in and day out waiting for news. Now, the deal has been hailed as an historic breakthrough, and it must have cost a pretty penny too. The delegates' hotels were by no means cheap. This is the Ritz-Carlton. That's where the Russian negotiators stayed for over 2 weeks. Rooms at this hotel start at some 600 euros per night. But not all businesses were making money as a result of these talks. In fact, because the streets around the Coburg Palace had to be sealed off for security purposes, some bars and restaurants were left suffering because customers simply couldn't get to them. Was it difficult for business with the road blocked off and the negotiations?
Yes, of course. It was 20% we lost on guests. It was very bad from the evening to the afternoon. So,
are you relieved that the talks are over now?
Yeah, we are happy.
Police say to the tourists or some people, go away, you can't go here, and some can't sit here in the garden. It's really bad for us, but we are now happy that it's over here.
The US Secretary of State didn't scrimp during his stay here either. At one point during the exhausting negotiations, he visited this jewelry store for a spot of shopping, and then, evidently sick and tired of the food over at the Coburg Palace, he decamped over here to Vienna's finest restaurant for a spot of dinner. Then, when he emerged, he was greeted by a crowd of tourists who'd seen the TV cameras and the reporters, and had heard rumours that Hollywood actor Jim Carrey had come to town. Now that the media circus has packed up and left, there are some businesses counting their earnings here and others breathing a sigh of relief. Reporting from the Austrian capital, I'm Polly Boyko.
Well, if you want more reaction to the Iran deal and its controversies, as well as analysis on the economic and geopolitical repercussions, find them at rt.com. Today, it is time for the Greek Parliament to decide whether the country should accept the bailout deal offered by European creditors. Although it was met with relief by the Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras, he's showing very little enthusiasm for it.
Το αποτέλεσμα του Συνόδου Κορυφής των 19 και του Eurogroup ήταν ένα αποτέλεσμα μιας πίεσης ισχυρής προς μια χώρα και έναν λαό που δημοκρατικά έχει εκφραστεί. Αυτή είναι η αλήθεια. Σε συνθήκες χρηματοπιστωτικής ασφυξίας και εκβιασμού.
The International Monetary Fund, though, has blasted the debt deal between Greece and its Eurozone partners as unrealistic and unattainable. A leaked document from the IMF concludes that the Greeks need far more debt relief to even have a chance of recovery. This measure is one of the most fiercely opposed by Greece's creditors. The IMF also suggests Greece should get a 30-year grace period before starting to pay off its debts. Otherwise, it is currently estimated that a public debt will reach 200% of GDP in 2 years. The former finance minister and popular politician Yanis Varoufakis said he would not vote for this deal.
Reading the decision of the Europeans, I really could not believe my eyes. I called the Euro Summit's decision a very blatant blow to the credibility of the European Union, to the ideal of European integration, to the project to create a common place for the prosperity of Europeans.
In a sign of how desperate the government has become, dozens of Greek islands dotting the Mediterranean have now been put up for sale. And for those wanting their own crystal clear waters and ancient ruins, it might be quite the bargain. Let's show you some of the beautiful islands that can be quite easily bought at a pretty reasonable price. A lot of those are costing less than a simple house in London. Financial analyst Michael Hudson says these desperate measures will not help.
You could sell 1,000 islands and only get about $1 billion. So they're only a drop in the budget. Not many people would want to live on an abandoned islands, and 90% of Greece's islands are empty. But more important, suppose Greece sells land and islands, it still has the ability to levy real estate taxes on these islands. So if someone buys the island, they're all of a sudden going to be obligated to pay a real estate tax that's going to drastically reduce the market price of these islands.
And thousands are expected to join shows of solidarity for Greece across Europe and beyond today. We'll bring you the very latest updates as our correspondents report from cities joining the display of support for the Greeks.